I am Evelyn Carter, 35 years old. And if someone asked me what makes a person truly despair, I would not hesitate to answer. It was the moment my mother stood up, smiled in the middle of the anniversary dinner, and said, "Clara is the only daughter who truly knows how to love." How ridiculous. And what about me? The mortgage bills, the mounting debts, the holiday gifts for relatives, even the upcoming trip for their 40th wedding anniversary, who had been quietly paying for it all? Who else but me, the daughter who kept begging for scraps of cheap affection from her own parents? But when those words rang out, I finally understood everything. In their eyes, I had never existed. And right there at the Nashville Lodge that night, I told myself, this would be the day I said enough. Before I tell you what happened after that night, leave me a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever been pushed aside by your own family right inside your own home. The story begins at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Nashville Lodge was decorated like something out of a magazine, crisp white tablecloths, sparkling chandeliers, and roses carefully arranged on every long table. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and words of congratulations. I sat quietly among 60 familiar faces. Everyone looked excited, while I forced a smile and took a sip of wine to ease the tightness in my chest. Inside, I was carrying a little secret. I was the one who had booked an entire family vacation, a gift I had been planning for months. I had imagined us all at the beach together, my parents smiling with joy, my sister Clara touched by the gesture. I thought, this time, surely my parents would see me differently. But when the lights dimmed and my mother stood up, every dream shattered with a single sentence. She raised her glass, her face glowing under the golden chandelier. Her voice rang out clearly across the silent room. "Clara is the only daughter who truly knows how to love." The hall erupted in applause. Gasps of agreement echoed, and someone even called out, "Exactly. Clara's always been the devoted one." Relatives turned toward my sister, raising their glasses in her honor, their eyes brimming with pride. Clara lifted her hand to her mouth, pretending to be shy, but the gleam of triumph in her eyes betrayed her. I sat frozen. My smile was stiff, my chest clenched as if an invisible hand was crushing it. I heard a few whispers, "What about Evelyn?" Then came the pitying shakes of heads, the avoiding glances. In my mind, an imaginary camera panned across every face, some smiling wide, some looking at me as if to say, "Just accept it." But not a single person stood on my side. In an instant, all the hope I had pinned on that vacation crumbled. The mortgage payments I had covered, the holiday gifts I had prepared, even the anniversary trip I had paid for, suddenly meant nothing. I thought I would finally be acknowledged. But the truth was, no matter how much I gave, in their eyes, I had never existed. I lowered my gaze to the glass of wine in front of me. The dark red liquid shimmered like blood, reflecting the ache tightening in my chest. My fingers clenched the little clutch on my lap until my knuckles turned white. A part of me wanted to let it slide, to stay silent like I always had. But another part, the part that had been starved for 35 years, screamed, "Enough." I stood up. The chair scraped against the wooden floor, startling a few people into turning around. I walked slowly toward the podium. My heart pounded so loudly my ears buzzed, but my steps were steady. Clara stiffened, her smile vanishing, her eyes blinking rapidly as if she couldn't believe I dared to ruin this perfect scene. I took the microphone. A faint squeal of feedback cut the air, pulling the room into an unnatural silence. Every gaze locked on me, curious, confused, some even tense. I inhaled, looked straight at my parents, and spoke slowly, each word slicing like a knife. "Are you sure about that?" The room went dead silent. No one knew exactly what I meant, but everyone could feel the charged electricity slicing through the celebration. A few murmurs flickered and died. Clara frowned, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing with irritation. I didn't wait for a response. I set the microphone down, the hard clack echoing in the elegant room. Then I turned, walking away from the stage. The click of my heels on the wooden floor merged with the rush of whispers swelling behind me. I didn't look back. The golden lights stretched my shadow long and trembling, but my stride was straight and unwavering. The lodge doors swung open. The Nashville night air rushed in, sharp and cold against my skin, like a slap waking me from a long daze. I took a deep breath. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just leaving a party. I was walking away from a role that had caged me for 35 years. The door of the lodge closed behind me with a heavy click, as if sealing off an entire chapter of my life. The Nashville night wind brushed against my face, carrying a biting chill. I shivered, yet my chest felt strangely lighter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to turn back, not searching for a way to beg for a place in their hearts. I just kept walking, my heels tapping steadily against the wooden floor of the long hallway. With every step, I could hear a clear echo in my head, enough. But as my shadow blended into the night, childhood memories surged back, pulling me into the days when the word enough felt impossible. I saw myself at 11. It was my birthday. A small cake sat on the kitchen table with a few crooked candles, no sign of friends, no birthday wishes. Because the whole family was too busy preparing for Clara's piano recital. Mom fussed over which dress she should wear, Dad drove her to the venue. I sat alone in the dark kitchen, blowing out candles no one cared to look at. Smoke curled around my face as I closed my eyes and wished, please, just once, let them see me. But that wish vanished as quickly as the smoke itself. Another image flooded and I was 15. Clara fell sick right before an exam. I copied notes, stayed up late writing study guides so she wouldn't fall behind. When she passed, Mom and Dad looked at her with pride in their eyes. No one knew I had done all the work in the background. I just stood behind them, clutching a thick stack of notes, feeling hollow. And then at 22, the day I landed my very first job. I called my parents, excitement bubbling in my voice, craving a word of praise. But instead of hearing, "Congratulations, Evelyn," they asked, "What about Clara? Did she get a job yet?" I went silent, swallowing hard. A part of me died a little more each time moments like that happened. The whistling wind of the present dragged me back. I stopped, lifting my head to the Nashville sky. No stars tonight, only rolling gray clouds. But inside the cold, I felt something flicker that almost resembled freedom. I tightened my grip on my purse. My fingers were frozen stiff, knuckles standing out, yet no longer trembling. That purse, so many years it had been the thing I carried to pay bills, cover expenses the family treated as obvious. Now, it felt like a symbol. And I silently promised myself, from this day on, it would no longer be the family purse. It would be mine. The sound of my heels echoed again against the wooden floor, slower, sharper. In my mind it played like a slow-motion scene, my shadow stretching along the hallway, the rhythm of my shoes, the purse clutched tight in my hand. Every detail etched itself in my memory, like an unerasable milestone. And suddenly, Clara's face appeared again in those memories. She had always been the center. Every compliment, every hug, every toast, it all went to her. As for me, if I wasn't just a shadow, then I was the pair of hands working quietly in the background. I remembered once Mom told a relative, "Evelyn's strong, she doesn't need anyone to worry about her. Clara's the fragile one." I forced a smile then, but inside it cut like a knife. The truth was, it was exactly because I was too strong that I had never been loved like a daughter should. I stepped down the lodge stairs. Cold air filled my chest, but this time I spread my arms and inhaled deeply. One word rang in my head like a bell: enough. It no longer felt like despair. It sounded like a vow. I looked out toward the dark road leading home. A path I had walked countless times, but tonight it carried a different meaning. I was no longer Evelyn, the girl trailing behind, swallowing tears every time she was left behind. I was becoming Evelyn, the woman who knew she deserved respect. A taxi pulled up. I opened the door and slid in. The window reflected my face, pale, eyes tired, yet lit by a determination I had never seen before. I touched that reflection gently, as if whispering, "You don't have to wait for anyone anymore." The car rolled forward. City lights slipped away behind the glass, like I was saying goodbye to an old life. I knew, once I set foot back home, I would face a storm. But this time, I wouldn't be silent anymore. When the taxi stopped in front of my small apartment, the clock was already close to midnight. Nashville was still awake, the glow from a bar at the end of the street spilling through my window, flickering as if to remind me that out there, life still went on, that freedom still had its breath. I stepped out of the car, my heels tapping against the cold sidewalk, the wallet in my hand feeling heavier than usual, not because of the money inside, but because of the decision I was about to make. I opened the door to my apartment. The familiar space rushed in, but this time, it no longer felt like a place to collapse in before running another lap on the hamster wheel of family duties. It felt like a room where I could start over. I turned on the light, took off my coat, placed my wallet on the kitchen table, and sat down, staring at it for a long moment. That wallet had been with me through all the years of adulthood. Every time I opened it was another time I bled a little more for my family. This time, I gently pushed it shut. The sound was faint, but to me, it was like an oath. Everything had changed. I opened my laptop. The blue glow lit up my face, laying bare the dark circles under my eyes. Online banking pages appeared. I moved the cursor, my heart pounding when the list of recurring transfers came up: utilities for my parents, tuition Clara never paid herself, health insurance, even the little expenses I had quietly absorbed. Each line on that list cut like a wound reopening. I paused the cursor. Click. Cancel. A pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to stop this transaction? I drew a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I pressed confirm. One by one, the transactions disappeared. My phone started ringing. The screen lit up again and again: Mom, then Dad, then Clara. I sat still, letting the ringtone echo through the small apartment. Missed calls stacked like a frantic piece of music, but I didn't pick up. I knew if I did, I'd be pulled right back into the cycle. This time, I let it ring, then stop, then ring again. And I stayed silent. I moved on to the supplementary credit card. For years, I'd let Clara use it as if it were her birthright. Every charge came to my phone: a new dress, a vacation, a fancy dinner. I used to convince myself, that's what sisters do. But looking at it now, I saw it had always been one way I paid: she spent. I opened the management page, found cancel supplementary card. My cursor hovered for a second, then I clicked. The confirmation notice popped up, and this time, I smiled. The wallet still sat on the table, closed. I brushed my fingers across its worn leather, feeling as if I had just shut the door on something old and suffocating. In my mind, I heard that same faint click, like when I left the lodge. Only this time, it came from me. My phone buzzed again. Messages poured in. Evelyn, what's going on? Why were the accounts cut off? Are you crazy? Clara needs to pay her tuition. Answer your mother right now. I set the phone down, unmoved. Those words used to send me into a panic, scrambling to fix things just to keep the peace. Tonight, they were nothing but meaningless characters on a screen. I picked up the wallet, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. Such a small action, yet it marked the end of living as their shadow. I stood and walked to the window. The city lights reflected in my eyes, and I saw myself differently. Not Evelyn drained dry by her family, but Evelyn writing her own story. Outside, everything went on, cars sped by, young people gathered, music thumped from the bar. And me, for the first time in years, I felt silence as a reward. I returned to the table, shut the laptop. In the apartment, only the sound of my heartbeat remained steady, strong. I smiled. Not the forced smile I wore when Mom praised Clara, but a smile that rose from somewhere real. I knew the storm would come. They would track me down, accuse, maybe even threaten. But the wallet had closed. And once it closed, it would never open for anyone but me again. I turned off the lights, the apartment sinking into gentle darkness. But inside me, a new light was just beginning to flicker. And I knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of a confrontation I had owed myself for far too long. The next morning, the Nashville sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, touching my face as I woke up. But instead of feeling peaceful, my small apartment immediately filled with familiar sounds, the phone buzzing nonstop, message notifications popping up one after another. I picked up the phone, dozens of missed calls. All from a few familiar names, Mom, Dad, and Clara. I opened the messages. And just as I guessed, the storm began. Evelyn, what do you think you're doing? Why did you stop all the transactions? Do you know how many bills we have to pay? Clara's credit card got canceled. She might not be able to register for her new semester. Your sister needs you, and you're being selfish like this? You embarrassed me in front of the family. Clara is the one who sacrifices for this family. All you ever do is think of yourself. The words kept pouring in, relentless, sharp, like little knives stabbing straight into my mind. I read every single one, and instead of fear, I felt my heart settle, like a lake after a storm. I didn't respond. I just placed the phone back on the table, letting it buzz and vibrate. Another ding came through. I glanced at the screen. This time, the tone had changed completely. Sweetheart, maybe I went too far yesterday. Clara only wanted the whole family to have a nice trip together. We all deserve a break after such a long year. Dad knows you're upset, but don't make things worse. We're old now. All we want is for the family to be happy. Don't turn this into hatred. Clara loves you too, but she's clumsy at showing it. She even bought the plane tickets for the trip. Could you please help just one last time? I let out a soft laugh, but there was no joy in it. Just last night, they stood in that hall, showering Clara with praise as if she were the only child who mattered, while I was nothing but a shadow. And now, with the money cut off, their voices had turned sweet, pleading, full of excuses. I sat down, held the phone in my hand, staring at the glowing screen. Message after message, call after call. I could almost hear the urgency, the desperation on the other side, as if their world only kept spinning if I kept pumping blood into it. But I didn't pick up. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the cars stream down below. In that moment, I realized silence itself can be an answer. An answer louder than any words I could ever say. The phone rang again. I quietly glanced at it. On the screen, Clara's frantic, all-caps message flashed. Eve, what are you doing? This trip is the family's dream. Don't be selfish and ruin everything. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness spreading on my tongue, but somehow it felt strangely comforting. I thought to myself, the family's dream or just theirs? For years, my dreams were never considered. I once longed for a birthday card, a simple "how are you doing?" a hug without strings attached. But all I ever got were bills and responsibilities. The phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother's voice, left on voicemail. Evelyn, I know I hurt you. But sweetheart, you're the oldest daughter. You must understand your responsibility. Clara is weaker, she needs your protection. Don't make me sad anymore. Just reopen the transactions, and we'll all forget this ever happened. I sat still, letting the words echo, then fade away. Responsibility. Protection. Forget everything. They had used those words my entire life like invisible chains, binding every sacrifice I made into a duty that never earned recognition. But today, for the first time, I felt those chains fall. I set my coffee cup down, taking a deep breath. The phone kept ringing. I didn't turn it off. I let it blare, so I could hear their panic, their chaos on the other side. And with each ring, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't going back. As the sun rose higher, the calls slowed. I knew they wouldn't stop, they'd find other ways. From insults to begging, from blame to promises. But I was different now. I no longer trembled at the sound of my mother's voice. I no longer scrambled to make everyone happy. I stood up and closed the window. Inside my small apartment, the silence became crystal clear. Once again, I reminded myself, my silence is also an answer. And that answer is, it's time for them to face the consequences. I picked up my laptop, opened the screen again, not to stop transactions this time, but to prepare for the next step. Receipts, invoices, banking history, all of it would be truth they couldn't deny. And I knew the real confrontation was only just beginning. I used to think, at the very least, that my workplace was the one place that still offered me fairness. In the world of finance, every number follows its own rules, and the truth lives within each line of data. I believed that if my family could twist everything, then work would remain the most transparent place. But I was wrong. One Monday morning, as soon as I stepped into the bank lobby, I felt the difference. The usual smiles that greeted me had dimmed, replaced with hints of suspicion. A few colleagues stood in small groups, falling silent the moment I walked past. I caught fragments of hushed words, embezzlement, shady transfers, abusing her position. My chest tightened. I understood instantly, Clara had made her move. It took only a few hours for the rumor to spread throughout the office. They said I was stealing from the company to fund my family, that the support I had sent home was actually dirty money. I saw doubt in the eyes of colleagues who once trusted and relied on me. The hardest to bear was the look from Marcus, my direct supervisor, who had once praised me as the backbone of the branch. That afternoon, the secretary knocked lightly on my desk and handed me a slip, emergency meeting with the board, 2 p.m. I stared at the paper, my heartbeat pounding. In my 8 years at the bank, I had never faced anything like this. The upstairs boardroom was cold, fluorescent light glaring down on the stern faces of the directors. Thick files sat stacked on the table, red marks highlighting every transaction linked to my name. Marcus began, his voice slow but firm. Evelyn, we've received an accusation that you used bank accounts to transfer personal funds to your family. Do you have anything to say in your defense? I looked at the numbers printed clearly on the pages. Yes, I had sent money home, but it came from my personal account, from the wages I had worked long nights to earn, not a single cent from company funds. And yet Clara had twisted this half-truth, turning it into ammunition to smear me. In that moment, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. I could do what I had always done: stay silent, endure, hope the truth would speak for itself. But this time, if I kept quiet, I would lose not only my job but also my dignity. I drew a deep breath and looked straight at Marcus and the others. I know these numbers. Yes, I sent money to my family. But it all came from my personal account, from the legal salary I've earned here over the past 8 years. I have never touched a single cent of the company's money. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had carefully kept personal bank statements, pay stubs, every date, every number aligned. I laid it on the table, my hands steady. If you wish, you can cross-check right now. I have nothing to hide. The room fell silent for a moment. A few leaned forward to scan the documents. Marcus lifted his gaze, his eyes flickering. I knew then that at least he saw the truth wasn't as simple as the rumors. But the most important thing wasn't whether they believed me or not. What mattered was that I had chosen differently. I was no longer silent. For the first time, I stood up to protect myself. When the meeting ended, Marcus nodded at me. We'll review this more carefully. But I appreciate how thoroughly you've prepared. I gave a faint smile, though my heart was still pounding. Walking out of the boardroom, I felt my steps steadier than ever. The cold draft in the hallway brushed past me, but instead of shivering, I felt it like fresh air opening a new path ahead. Clara could spread as many rumors as she wanted, but this time, I would not let her dictate my story. That night, I sat at the small desk in my apartment, opened my laptop. The screen lit up as I began sorting through files. I knew this was only the beginning. My family wouldn't stop, Clara wouldn't stop. But neither was I the same Evelyn I had been yesterday. I typed notes, gathered invoices, statements, receipts. Everything would become undeniable truth. This time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was preparing for a real confrontation. When the clock struck midnight, I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, feeling as if my whole body had shed an old shell. I knew with certainty, the choice not to stay silent today would lead me down a new road tomorrow. And that road began with gathering evidence. That night, my small apartment was no longer a place to rest. It turned into a silent battlefield where papers, bills, and files were scattered all over the table. The soft yellow glow of the desk lamp fell onto each sheet, as if they were whispering a story I had ignored for years. I started with old financial records. Utility bills, rent payments, loans, even the money transfers I had sent to my family for more than 10 years. Each document was like a slice of the past, the late nights I worked overtime, the early mornings I rushed to the bank before heading to the office. Every number, every ink stamp, stood out clearly, silent proof of how hard I had tried to balance my job while carrying my family on my shoulders. I printed everything. One page stacked on top of another, slowly forming thick piles. As I listened to the printer clatter, I felt an odd sense of peace. It was as if I was building a solid wall between myself and the lies Clara had been spreading. But paperwork alone wasn't enough. I opened my laptop and dug through old emails. Messages from my mother, from Clara, from other relatives appeared on the screen. They requested, they demanded, they subtly coerced me into sending more money. At first, it was, just this month, Evelyn, we're struggling so much. Then, you have a responsibility to the family, don't be selfish. And eventually, if you don't help, we'll consider you no longer family. Reading those lines made my chest tighten. Not because I hadn't known that's how they thought of me, but because now, everything existed in the form of evidence. I had gotten used to enduring it, to trying to forget. But those emails, those texts, they couldn't lie. They preserved the truth intact. I had been exploited, not once, but for years. I saved each one, carefully placing them into folders on my computer. With every click of the mouse, it felt as though I was locking in another piece of truth, leaving no room for denial. Then, I pulled open the small drawer by my desk. It was a drawer I rarely touched, where I kept odds and ends of few old photos, a worn-out notebook. As it slid open with a creak, I realized the familiar motif, the secret drawer opening, carrying with it a past I had buried. Inside was a thick envelope where I had stuffed receipts and transfer slips in a rush. I carefully took it out and spread the papers across the desk. Some of them dated back to my first job, when my salary barely covered rent for my tiny apartment, yet I still forced myself to send money home. I remembered how I had felt then, proud, thinking I was helping carry the load. But looking at them now, I could see it clearly that giving had never been seen as love, only as a duty to be exploited. The desk lamp shone down on the pile, my shadow stretching long against the wall. I sat there for hours, not to mourn, but to turn fragments of memory into living evidence. Sometimes I paused, wondering, if an audience were sitting in front of me right now, what would they think, looking at the mountain of paperwork I had collected? Maybe they would see a worn-out woman, or a meticulous employee. But for me, it was the first time I realized my story no longer lived only in memory. It could be proven, line by line, number by number. The later the night grew, the quieter the room became. Only the sound of paper shuffling, keys clicking, and the printer running broke the silence. I sorted the files into neat stacks, marked them with colored pens, labeled them clearly: personal transfers, family emails, coercive messages. My desk now looked like a mini investigation office. And I, once seen as the passive one who silently endured, was slowly becoming the one holding the scales. By the time the clock ticked past 1 a.m., I leaned back in my chair. In front of me lay an entire system of evidence, neatly arranged, undeniable. I felt as though I had just opened a new chapter, one where I no longer had to fear slander. I knew Clara and the rest of my family wouldn't stop easily. But now, I was no longer Evelyn who only kept silent and endured. The secret drawer had been opened, and from it, I found not just papers, but the strength I thought I had long lost. Tomorrow, the story would move to the next step. It wouldn't just be about gathering evidence anymore, it would be about confrontation. And this time, I was ready. It was Saturday afternoon, and the community hall's common room was bathed in a soft golden light. More than 60 chairs were lined up neatly in rows, and on them sat familiar faces: relatives, aunts and uncles, cousins. The very people I had once sent gifts to during the holidays, replied to with birthday greetings, and believed I was a part of their family. Today, they sat here, not for a joyful gathering, but to hear a story they never imagined I would tell. I stepped up onto the small podium at the front, my hands clasped tightly together to steady myself. My heart pounded hard, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was more like the drum roll before a performance I knew I had to begin. Thank you all for coming. I started, my voice steady, neither loud nor soft. Perhaps some of you have heard the rumors lately, that I am an embezzler, that I have mishandled money. But today, I will show you the truth. I signaled for the technician to turn on the projector. The light from the screen spilled across the room, and numbers appeared, stark and undeniable, a list of transfers, the money I had sent home to the family for more than 10 years. A few whispers broke out at first, but quickly fell silent. Each time I clicked the mouse, a new page appeared: rent payments I had covered, hospital bills, Clara's tuition, and countless emergencies. I turned, my eyes falling on the row where Clara sat. Her arms were crossed, lips pressed tightly, eyes darting around, avoiding mine. My mother's head hung low, and my father exhaled heavily. But I didn't stop. All of this, I continued, pointing at the screen, didn't just vanish into thin air. It was sweat, it was tears, it was the nights I worked myself to exhaustion so I could send it back here. I paused for a beat, letting the words sink into the thick, tense air. A faint cough came from the back row, then silence again. I clicked once more. The screen displayed an excerpt of an email. My voice read it aloud, slow and deliberate. If you don't send more, then don't blame us for cutting you off as family. The whole room held its breath. I looked up, saw a few eyes shift uncomfortably, some whispered into each other's ears. But no one spoke up for Clara or my parents. I drew in a deep breath and spoke each word clearly. Clara may have been the only child loved. But I was the only child who paid the price. The weight of that sentence echoed through the silent hall, so quiet I could have heard a pin drop. My eyes swept across each face. Some looked down in shame, some stared blankly as if unable to process what they'd just seen, and some looked at me with a mix of pity and respect. Clara shot up, her voice sharp. That was just a few small amounts. "We're family, Evelyn. What are you doing, humiliating us like this?" I held her gaze calmly, no longer trembling. Family doesn't coerce with threats. Family doesn't turn love into a debt to be collected. If this is the kind of family I'm given, then today, I choose to stop. An uncle rose halfway to his feet, as if to say something, then sank back down. No one wanted to defend Clara now. The evidence I had laid bare was too clear, leaving no room for denial. I gathered the papers, my voice slow but firm. I didn't come here to apologize. I came here to take back my voice. For years, I stayed silent, believing family ties were worth enduring. But that silence was exploited. And today, I end it. I looked around the room, and I felt the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of disregard, it was the silence of recognition, of a truth that could no longer be denied. Leaving the podium, I walked down, each step steady. The microphone lay behind me, while I strode straight toward the door. The late afternoon light spilled in, the wind tugged at my hair, carrying with it a strange new sense of freedom. I knew this battle wasn't over. Clara and my parents would surely find another way to strike back. But this time, I wasn't running anymore. I had unmasked them before the entire family. And from this moment on, I no longer walked as the silent one, but as someone who dared to speak the truth. Outside, the sky was painted red by the setting sun. A new chapter was beginning, and I knew I would never return to the old days again. As I was just reaching the door of the hall, the scraping of chairs and hurried footsteps echoed behind me. "Evelyn, wait," my mother's voice trembled, carrying both desperation and a fear I hadn't heard in years. I froze, not because I wanted to, but because part of me still reacted instinctively to that call. When I turned, I saw her clinging tightly to my father's arm for support. Her eyes were swollen red, glistening with tears, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother looking so small. "Please," she choked, as if swallowing every breath with each word. "Don't do this to us. After all, we're still family." My father's voice followed, heavy and weary. "Maybe we were wrong, but everything we did was to keep this family together. We never meant to hurt you." Behind them, Clara stood with her arms crossed, her face tense but her tone softened, feigning gentleness. "Evelyn, you're blowing this out of proportion. Every family has secrets, misunderstandings. Why expose it all? Do you really think money defines love? That's not fair." Those polished words tried to paint me as the destroyer, the one shattering what was supposed to be sacred. But the twitch at the corner of her mouth told me Clara was only protecting her own convenience, not love. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. My body no longer trembled. My heart no longer pounded wildly in my chest as it once did every time I faced them. Instead, there was a strange calm, so clear it made me feel as though I was finally standing on my own feet. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, my voice not loud but firm enough to carry through the nearly empty room. "But I am no longer this family's wallet. No longer the emergency fund, no longer the sister silently paying the price so everyone else can pretend everything is fine." Tears streamed down my mother's face. She reached a hand toward me, trying to bridge the distance with sheer desperation. "We were afraid, Evelyn. Afraid of losing face, of being looked down on by outsiders. Please, don't turn your back on us. We're still your parents." For a brief moment, the word parents clenched my heart. It should have meant shelter, compassion, unconditional love. But in this family, it had been twisted into transactions, into invoices disguised as tradition. "You taught me that love had to be earned through sacrifice." I met their gaze without blinking. But real love doesn't come with receipts. It doesn't demand through bank transfers and sleepless nights. My father's shoulders sank, his lips pressed tight as if forced to swallow a truth too heavy to bear. And Clara's voice suddenly sharpened again. "So what does that mean? You think you're better than us? You think walking away makes you stronger?" I turned to her, my eyes still calm. "No, Clara. Walking away doesn't make me better. It just makes me free." The air froze. The hall went utterly silent. My mother's sobs rang louder, every sob ripping through the stillness. For years, I had wished she would cry for me. But in this moment, I realized those tears weren't for losing me, they were for losing control. I stood tall, my shoulders released, letting the late afternoon sunlight stream through the door, washing me in a warm glow. "I will always hold on to the love I once had for this family," I said softly, my tone gentler, "but I will no longer carry its debts." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. No one moved. Even Clara, usually the quickest to speak, was frozen like stone. I cast one last look around faces that once had been my anchors, now blurred by the distance I finally allowed myself to create. Then I stepped through the door. Outside, the air carried the scent of grass and wood smoke, sharp yet full of life. The wind brushed against my face, like a welcoming touch. Behind me, the hall remained silent, holding all that had crumbled and all that I had just let go. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I simply walked away, leaving behind a silence so thick they might take weeks, even years, to fill. And as my feet carried me down the path gilded by the golden evening light, I knew I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I carried my voice, my truth, and above all, the freedom I had never known. Because sometimes, letting go is the only way to begin again. And little did I know, that very act of closure would open another confrontation where truth and bloodlines could no longer be escaped. The sunrise in Nashville is unlike anywhere else. The gentle light of dawn poured through the window of my small apartment, as if to remind me that after the longest nights, the sun always comes back. I sat on the chair by the window, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, watching the city slowly wake up. The sound of car horns, hurried footsteps, and sparrows chirping on the rooftop all came together like a new soundtrack for the life I had just rewritten for myself. Just a week ago, I was still standing in a crowded room, listening to sobs, late tears, and the suffocating weight of silence. Today, I just sit here, breathing, and realizing I am still whole. Maybe peace isn't as loud as I once thought. It comes when you finally know that, in the end, you survived it all. I looked over at the old wallet sitting neatly on the table. For so long, it had been the symbol of silent sacrifice, a wallet always open to meet someone else's demands. Now, it was empty. No longer stuffed with restaurant bills, plane tickets, or bank receipts. Only a simple space remained, and strangely enough, that emptiness made me feel lighter. I smiled softly, touched the worn leather, and whispered to myself, enough. Love should never be a transaction. It's not lifeless numbers in an account, not an assumption that someone is obligated to pay to keep the peace. True love is respect. It is the gaze that meets you as an equal, the fairness in every sacrifice. And this is what I want to say directly to you, the one listening to this story. If you've ever been turned into your family's wallet, if you've ever felt love tied to receipts and bills, remember this, you have the right to say enough. That right is not selfishness, it's how you protect your dignity and your worth. Some people may cry. Some may blame you, call you a traitor. But the truth is this: if their love only exists when you pay for it, then it was never love at all. And when you dare to let go, you'll find something far more precious: freedom. In that freedom, you'll have the chance to meet real love, whether it comes from friends, from a partner, or from your own once weary heart. The morning light now shone directly on the table, illuminating the empty wallet, turning it into a new symbol. No more burden, no more binding. Only light and truth. I took another sip of coffee, tasting the bitterness mingled with a hint of sweetness. And I knew this was only the beginning. One door had closed, but before me, another was opening, a future no longer defined by invisible debts. If you're listening to me now and see a part of your own story in mine, let the words enough echo a little further. Share this video so someone out there knows they are not alone. Hit like if you believe love cannot be bought. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that might touch the hidden corners of your heart, please subscribe. Sometimes, just one small click can be our way of telling the world, I deserve more than this.